Welcome to the Jayda InStitches show, and welcome to the 2023 Fair Isle Style Calendar Blanket Border Tutorial. The long-awaited border is here. This year's blanket border is the biggest one we've ever attempted. It is 5 rows, and I'm not going to say it's difficult, but there is a little bit of challenge to it because we just had to work a little bit more graph work into that border. Now this little square kind of donut shape, it's kind of like what I like to refer to as one of the Fair Isle fillers. You'll see a lot of these sort of simple repeating smaller images like little X's or little crosses or little dots, little circles, things like this, and they're kind of filled in to the knit work in between larger, more complicated graph imagery. So I thought it would be fitting to just work a simple one around the entire edge of the blanket. And I love how this finishes it off. Now you'll also notice that we extend this graph work into the corner. So we get sort of, in a sense, a little bit of a colored corner. You can do this, or you can leave the corner blank. Either way, it's going to create a really neat frame concept for the blanket. So I'm going to explain how you can do the color corner work, like I've done here, or how you can just use color A all the way through the border. So that said, this little graph image is based on an 8-stitch repeat. 8 stitches. So not 12 or 20, but 8. Now this is important. Why? Because I know some of you went off script and added more rows or did more repeats of the graph, and I'm here to tell you that I have got the fix for making sure that this border still works on your blanket. We're not leaving anybody behind. So quickly, if you get to the end of the first row of the foundation row of the border and you count up all of your stitches, and the top and the bottom will be the same and your 2 sides will be the same. If one of those stitch counts is not a perfect multiple of 8, you need to write down the number and figure out what the closest multiple of 8 is. So let's say the top of your blanket stitch count is a multiple of 8 plus 2. Well, then you would take the graph and you would start the graph work 1 extra stitch in from the corner, and it will end 1 extra stitch in from the other corner. If your stitch count is a multiple of 8 plus 4, then you will start that graph work 2 stitches in from the corner, and it will end 2 stitches in from the other corner. And if your graph work stitch count ends up being a multiple of 8 plus 6, then you will start your graph work 3 stitches in from the corner, and it will end 3 stitches in from the other corner. And you're going to use stitch markers to just keep track of that. I'll explain that in the video. And don't worry, your stitch count will be a perfect even multiple, whatever it is, because that's just how this blanket worked out. So let's grab our blankets. We'll grab our hooks, we'll grab our yarn, we'll head on over to the craft table, and we will stitch up the 2023 Fair Isle Style Calendar Blanket Border together. In order to add the border to our Fair Isle Style Calendar Blanket, you are going to want to have the same hook you've been using all along. I've been using a 5.5 millimeter. This is also known as an I or a 9. A pair of scissors, a yarn needle. I recommend having some stitch markers on hand just to help keep track of where we are on the border. And yarn. Same yarn. I'm using a size 4 medium weight acrylic. You're going to want around 250 yards in your color A and around 200 yards in your color B. You're also going to want your blankets, and once you've got all that together, we can get started. This month, the graph looks a little different than normal. Our border is 5 rows high, and it's built over multiples of 8 stitches. So I've got a little sampler that is 24 stitches long. I recommend playing with colors if you're not entirely sure which ones you want to use. You can technically use any pair of colors you want. You could also make all of your little squares different colors or just alternate the color. It's whatever your little heart desires. So if you are thinking about using up yarn, then you might want to consider having 250 yards of your color A and then working in multiple colors of the rest of your blanket if you used a bunch of colors in your blanket like I did. Otherwise, you can just sort of alternate between 2 colors. Your color A does not have to be the main color A that you used on your blanket if you really want the frame of your blanket to stand out. But that's why we make samplers, so I'll leave that bit up to you. This is the graph that we will be following today. So like I said, we are 5 rows high. Same sort of reading. If you're right-handed, you start over here where the little number is. If you're left-handed, you're starting on the opposite side. But this is a mirror image chart, so it's no worries whether you start looking at it from this side or that side. I made this over a 24 stitch repeat, but it is technically every 8 stitches we're repeating. I just thought you might like to see it laid out like that because this is a longer bit of crochet versus sort of the usual square, but technically it is just these 8 stitches that we will be kind of repeating over and over and over again. And we treat our corners slightly differently, so we're going to have to pay attention when we get to the corners, which is why I recommend having the stitch markers on hand. We will have this graph sitting up here like we normally do, so if you are moving along a little faster than me or a little slower, it's right there for you to keep an eye on. When I left off at the end of the December edition, I put a little pin in my working loop. And like I said back then, I wasn't sure if I was going to continue with my color A in white or if I was going to change things up, but I'm going to continue with white. It's entirely up to you if you want to use your regular color A or a completely different one, but keeping that little pin in your working loop gives you the choice. So if you're going to continue with color A, you don't need to cut your original working yarn. You can just continue from where you left off at the end of the last row of the December stitch. If you are going to change colors, you can fasten off your color A and select your new color A. Otherwise, hooks in loops where you're going to chain 2. Chain 2 counts as the first stitch of the row. We're going to turn our blankets. And let's take a look at the graph. Row 1, as in so many of our graphs, is all color A. So we will be using color A to work the foundation row of our border all the way around our blanket. So you don't have to worry about any color changing right now. You can put the B color off to the side. Also, you don't need to use any spools. We are going to be carrying color B throughout. So no spool use today. So chain 2 counts as the first double crochet of the row, and we're going to start by double crocheting in each stitch all the way across the top of our blankets. Nice and easy, just like we would be starting another graph from scratch. Don't forget when you get to the end to work that last double crochet into the top of the chain 2 from the previous row. So you want to make sure you've got that perfect multiple of 20 stitches all the way across. It's 120 if you're making it the same size as me. We're going to chain 2. We're going to skip the edge of the row we just made. We're going to look for the row just below it. So this is the edge stitch on the row just below that. And around that stitch, we're going to work 2 double crochets. And then we're just going to pause. So there are 132 rows if you made your blanket exactly like mine. So that's 11 rows per graph. 12 graphs. So we did 12 entries of 11 rows each. That's 132 rows. Around the edge stitch of each of those 132 rows, you are going to work 2 double crochet. So you will have 264 stitches down the side of your blanket. If you added extra rows, extra divider rows, or you made more repeats of the graph, that's okay. All you need to do is count up the number of rows you've got and multiply that by 2, because you're going to work 2 double crochet around the edge stitch of each row going all the way down the side of your blanket. And so however many rows you had in your blanket, if you did a custom blanket, custom number of repeats or graphs, then you will just double that row count number to get your final stitch count for side 1 and side 2 of your blanket. So 2 double crochet around each edge stitch all the way down. And if you get lost, remember, just place it down. You can block it into each of those graphs, remembering that each graph had 11 rows in it, so you can sort of mark out the edge of those 11 rows and do them one graph at a time. So get your stitch markers out, mark out the 11 row ends. They're easy to spot if you're just looking for those double crochet stitches. Work the first set of 11, move your stitch markers, work the next set of 11, and so on. And that way, you'll keep track of where you are. You won't accidentally add in extra stitches. Have too few, have too many. You want 264 double crochet all the way down the edge. And I'll see you at the bottom. When you get to the bottom of that side, you work your last 2 double crochet around the last edge stitch of what was row 1 of the entire blanket. Chain 2, we're going to orient our blankets now so that we're working across the bottom foundation row edge. So for me, that's the bottom of my snowflakes, the January strip. You're going to identify that first chain and you're going to work a double crochet into it. So there's your little corner. It finishes 2 double crochet in the edge stitch of what was row 1 of the blanket, chain 2, and then double crochet into the first foundation chain. You're going to double crochet now into each of the foundation chains across that bottom of the blanket. You'll still have 120 stitches, or that perfect multiple of 20, running all the way across the bottom. Like the end of most rows, that last double crochet is worked into the last chain, which was the bottom of the turning chain from that first row or that foundation row of the blanket. So make sure, keep a stitch marker handy if you find it helps, make sure you've got 120 stitches across the bottom, or that perfect multiple of 20, because you want to make sure you've got the right stitch count so that we can make our border work going forward. Chain 2 for the corner. Turn your blanket. We're now working up the other side. The other side's exactly the same as the first side. You're skipping that last row of double crochet. You just made this row, so you're not working into the side of it. You are working into the side of what was the first row of the blanket. So 2 double crochet around the edge of each row. It's the same stitch count up side 2 as it was up side 1. So there's 132 rows there, if your blanket is the same size as mine. 2 double crochet around each row edge all the way up the blanket, and I'll see you up at the top. When you've worked your last 2 double crochet into the edge of what was the last row of the blanket, so row 11 of the December graph, remember you're not working into the side of the border. That's this row up here. This is where we started the border. You're going to chain 2, find the top of the chain 2 that began the whole border row, and you're going to slip stitch into that chain 2 to join. So that chain 2, remember, it counts as a double crochet. You're going to chain 2, join, and you've got 4 chain 2 corner spaces all the way around your blanket. And importantly, you'll have 120 stitches across the top and the bottom, and 264 stitches along the sides, or a multiple of 2, however many rows in your blanket you had, you multiply that by 2, and that gives you the stitch count for the sides, and it should be the same on both sides. At the end of every row of the border, we're going to chain 2 and turn, just like we did with the blanket. This is so we keep those border stitches, or the stitches in each graph, aligned on top of each other. If you always go in the same direction and you try to do graph work, your imagery is going to skew one way or the other. And that's because the tops of our stitches skew to the left or skew to the right. That's just the way they're made. And as you work a stitch into the stitch from the row previous, it's going to sit just a little bit to the left or just a little bit to the right with every increasing row. And that's if you always go in one direction. So we want to chain 2, turn, just like we did with the blanket, just to keep that nice aligned graph imagery going. So every side of the blanket, and there are 4 sides, you need to think about this graph starting all over again. So this, for example, this is our chain 2 that began border row 1. This is row 1, stitch 1 of the graph, and then we repeated that little symbol every 8 times, or I showed you that 24 repeat, but it's basically 8 repeats over and over and over. It's all in color A. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the first 8 stitches of the little graph. Then I start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. All the way over to the next corner. And then it ends. 5, 6, 7, 8. Chain 2 for the corner. And then we start all over again. Row 1, stitch 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Start again. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so every side of the blanket, you're starting the graph all over again. Well, you might be asking yourself, what do we do about the corners? Because you know we end up including more and more stitches in our corners as we add a row. We want to make sure that row 2 stitch 1 sits directly on top of what was row 1 stitch 1, and that row 3 stitch 1 sits directly on top of row 2 stitch 1, which is on top of row 1 stitch 1. And that is how we get this sort of graph work going. This is why you're going to want some stitch markers. We are turning every row, but after you leave the corner, you can kind of see your pattern starting all over again. We are going to build this pattern into the corner, but it requires us to kind of think backwards. It's not as complicated as it sounds, but if you think, "Ugh, I don't want to bother with that," you can work all of your corner stitches in color A. Just look out for your first marked stitch. We're going to do this every time we turn, and then you start your border row pattern all over again. So you can choose to do your corners all in color A, which will still look really cool, just be a big block of color A. Or you can do what I'm doing, which is to continue this pattern into the corners. It also looks really neat. It's a little bit more challenging, so if you think you're up for the challenge, then you can stitch along with me. Otherwise, when we get to the corners, I'll announce we're in the corner, and you can just color A and carry your color B through the corner. So let's chain 2, turn our blankets around, and we're going to start marking out what is row 1 stitch 1 of our little corners so that we know where we are starting the pattern for border row 2. Now before we start with the actual crochet, I want you to go through and mark off the first stitch after the corner for all 4 of your corners. So now we're going in the correct direction because we've chained 2 and turned. You're just going to take a moment, grab a stitch marker, and mark that first stitch after the chain 2 corner, so that you remember that this is now the first stitch of the graph, so that you align the first stitch of the graph for row 2 directly on top of it. So just take a second, grab your stitch markers, and mark out the first stitch after your corner all the way around your blanket. This chain 2 that begins the row counts as a double crochet, and it's also sitting directly above the chain 2 from the previous row. So this is technically how row 2 is going to end. The first thing we come to is a corner. So we're going to treat the corner like we are going to continue the color into the corner. If you don't want to continue the color into the corner, you're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet with your A, and then pause when you get to your marked stitch so that we can all continue the graph together. If you want to work the graph in the corner, it looks like this. Double crochet, begin that double crochet with A, grab your B color, finish off that stitch with B, work a double crochet with B. I'm going to leave my little tail out. I'll come back and weave that in later. And that is the end of the graph because we're in the corner. We're going to chain 2, and we would be kind of starting the graph going the opposite direction. It's sort of like a mirror image thing. If you held this graph right up to a mirror, you probably played that game when you were a kid. If you held this up to a mirror right here, this is what you would get. But if you held it up to a mirror right here, you would also get another row of blue. So you have to kind of consider the corners like a little mirror image. We're going to double crochet with our B color, carrying the A. So we're carrying the A underneath. And before we finish that, we are going to switch back to A. One more double crochet in the corner. So your corners are A, B, chain 2, B, A. A, B, chain 2, B, A. Those are the corners if you're changing colors. If you're not for row 2, it's just 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet in A. But that brings us right up to our first marked stitch. This is stitch 1 of row 1, so that's stitch 1 of the graph, which means that, if we look at our graph, stitch 1 of row 2 is A. Then we do 6B, 1A, repeat. 1A, 6B, 1A, repeat. So 1A, we're carrying B, we switch to B. Now we do 6 in B, Work the first half of that 6th stitch. I'm going to tug on my A a little bit. Finish it with A, and then it's 1 in A to finish the little 8 stitch repeater. 1A, 6B, 1A, repeat. The corners are treated differently. When you get to the corner, you're going to work 1A, 1B, chain 2, 1B, 1A. So the corner creates a mirror. If you're just doing it solid color, 2 double crochet in A, chain 2, 2 double crochet in A. It's entirely up to you. You're just going to repeat this little pattern, A for 1, B for 6, and A for 1, all the way along each side, remembering when you get to the corner that you're going to change, if you want to change for colors, A, B, chain 2, B, A, or AA, chain 2, AA if you don't want to change colors. I will let you work at that all the way around, and I'll catch up with you at the end of row 2. The last stitch of the row is B, but before you finish that 6th stitch in B, you are going to turn back to your A, or I should say switch back to A and finish it, because, as you'll recall, way back at the beginning, we began the row with the chain 2 in A, and that chain 2 counts as the first stitch of the row, and it sits directly atop what was stitch number 1 of row number 1. So we're going to join to the top of that chain 2 with a slip stitch, making sure that we're using color A. So here's our B, we've dropped it, we've joined with a slip stitch to the top of the chain 2, which is color A, and now we have an uninterrupted pattern running all the way around our blanket. Okay, we are still using A. We are going to chain 2 and turn our work, which is getting to be quite the event. Okay. And now we want to go back the other direction. So, once again, this is the first stitch. This was row 1, stitch 1. This was row 1, or row 2, stitch 1, and now this is row 3, stitch 1. It's a double crochet using A, and now we're working backwards across our graph pattern. So, it's a lot easier to see now because now we've established our pattern. So your 6 stitches in color B now have to have BB, AA, BB worked across those 6. So if it's A, you work A on top of it to start it. A, 2B, 2A, 2B, 1A, repeat. But because those color Bs are your main indicator that you've got to change, immediately you're going to pick up your B and you're going to start a double crochet. Now remember, you've got a little bit of a carry down here, so you just want to cover that. Don't pull too tightly. And that way you'll hide any carry as you bring it up. Double crochet into the next stitch. But before you change or you finish that, you're going to switch back now to A. You're going to work 2 double crochet in A. Switch back to B. Work 2 double crochet in B. Switch back to A. And then that little 8 repeat is finished with A. So the chain 2 begins the row. That counts as stitch number 1 of the graph. On row 3, that's A. These are the stitches that were worked into your previous corner. So your corner, all those stitches, you're increasing the stitch count as you go each row, and your corner is kind of moving away from you. So for the start of row 3 of the graph, I just want you to concentrate on making sure that you're repeating that little pattern. So it's A, 2B, 2A, 2B, A, repeat. A, 2B, 2A, 2B, A, repeat. more importantly, keep an eye on that graph. We are working across the established 6 B stitches from the previous row. I am always sort of taking a moment to make sure that my colors are being carried nicely so it looks nice on both sides. So this is what it's looking like so far. So this is your big indicator. Where you see those B stitches from the previous row, make sure that you start with 2B, 2A, 2B, and then you've got a little A in between. I'm going to let you work at that across the top of the blanket, and I'll catch up with you with the next corner to explain the corner. When you've finished repeating that little 8 stitch repeater, A, 2B, 2A, 2B, 1A, repeat, and you're all the way across, and you know you can't fit another one in because our visual indicator are those 6 B's from the previous row, from row 2. When you get to your corner, if you change colors like me, your corner looks something like this. A, B, chain 2, B, A. And that's because those 2 stitches were worked into the previous corner. Well, you know you need to work 2 double crochet into this corner to continue, but we don't want to ignore these 2 stitches. So here is the pattern for color change worked into the corner. With A, double crochet into the A stitch, switch to B, and double crochet into the B stitch. If you're not changing colors, it's A, A. Now we are in the corner. We are going to work a double crochet with B. We are going to switch to A and double crochet with A. Those are our 2 double crochet worked into the corner to start. If you're not changing color, that's 2 double crochet using A. We all chain 2 for the corner, and now we work this pattern in reverse on the way out. Double crochet with A, switch back to B, and double crochet with B. And those are the 2 double crochets worked into the corner after the chain 2. If you're not changing color, that is just chain 2, double crochet twice with A. Now we've got those other 2 stitches to contend with that were in the previous row's corner. So we double crochet with B, switch back to A, and double crochet with A. So that's the corner. If you're not changing colors, you finish your graph and you work A, 2 double crochet and A into the corner space, chain 2, 2 double crochet and A into the corner space, and then A. That brings us back to our little repeating graph. So there's your indicator of your 6 B stitches. You know you've got an A on either side. So the next stitch to begin the graph for row 2, or this is row 3 I should say, is an A, and then we immediately switch to B. So 1A, 2B, switch back to A, 2 and A, switch back to B, 2 and B, switch back to A, 1 in A, and repeat the graph. So now you're back, making sure that along those 6 B's you're working 2B, 2A, 2B. So that's your main indicator. It's really easy to see where you are once you've established row 2. For row 3, you're just going to repeat that 2B, 2A, 2B across those 6 B's from the previous row, making sure you've got an A on either side. So it's 2A, 2B, 2A, 2A, all the way across, really. Get to the corner, and if you're changing colors like me, you just refer back to this one. You finish your graph with a single A, and then you go A, B, B, A, chain 2, A, B, B, A, and then back to the graph. A, 2B, 2A, 2B, etc. I'm going to let you work away at that. That's row 3. And then I'll hook up with you at the beginning again, and we'll tackle row 4. Once you finish that last corner, you're going to be confronted with one more stitch in A before you get back to your chain 2 that began the row. So finish your last B, drop your B color, work your last stitch of the row in A, and then you can join with a slip stitch to the top of the chain 2 that began the whole row. There we go. So now we are finished with our row 3. We are moving on to row 4. Row 4 is just like row 2. Let's take a look at our graph here. So no more of this constant alternating. We are going to go back to this little A, 6B, 1A repeat. So there's 2 little A's in between large sections of B. So once again, you want to get that little pattern established, and then it'll be easy to kind of remember where you are. The corners are going to be a little bit different once again if you're changing colors. If you're not, you're just going to continue to work A all the way through the corner. And since the corner is the first thing we do when we chain 2 and turn, we're going to address that first. So let's chain 2 with A and turn our work. That chain 2 counts as a double crochet. It is also still sitting on top of all of the stitches that were either the first stitch or the last stitch of the little graph repeat, however you want to look at it, whichever direction you're going in. So the first thing we want to do is head into the corner. If you're not changing color, you're going to work A into each of the next 4 stitches, 2 double crochet in A, chain 2, 2 double crochet into the corner, and then A into each of the next 4 stitches, and I'll catch up with you there. If you're changing colors along with me, we are going to continue to mimic this little pattern throughout the corner, and now we have more stitches to work with. So here we go. We are going to work A into the next stitch, switch to B, and if you are switching to B, remember there might be a little bit of a carry back here. So when you work the next stitch in B, you're carrying A, and you're also looking to get that little, let me get my A out of the way, you're looking to get that little bit of B out of the way. There's B. Double crochet with B into the next stitch, and now we are mimicking, we are into our 4th row, we are mimicking row 4 of the graph throughout the corner. So you're going to continue to work B into the next stitch. That finishes all the stitches that kind of run up to the corner. So you're going to work 2B, chain 2, and 2B into the corner. So double crochet, 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet in B, and this is going to create sort of an angled version of our little donut in the corner. Making sure you're carrying your A, you're going to work a double crochet using B into the next stitch, into each of those next 2 that were in B from the previous row, and now you can change back to A. Finish that with 1 stitch in A, and now we should all be back to the same place. This is where this stitch right here represents stitch 1 of the graph. A to B to A to B was the previous row. A, 6B, 1A was the row before that, and that's what we're repeating. So into the next stitch, we do 1 stitch with A, immediately switch to B. Now it's 6 double crochet in B. We are closing in the top of the donut. All you need to do is establish this first graph repeat, and then it's easy peasy on the way out. 6 in B, switch back to A, 1 in A, and then you would repeat 1A, 6B, 1A, repeat. So we've filled in that little donut, and then of course we've got that same pattern repeating through the border corner. So you've got, once you get around to the end again, you'll have full complete looking donuts plus almost a full complete donut worked into the corner. It's kind of a neat way to finish off the corners. They're a little bit angular, and if you're just working in A all the way through the corners, then this is all A. So once you get to that last repeat of the graph, you just work A all the way through, remembering that every corner space gets 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet, regardless of whether you're just going with all A or if you're continuing with the graph pattern in the corner. All right, I'll let you guys work away at that. Remember, it's the repeat of row 2 of the graph, so row 5 and row 2, or I should say row 4 and row 2 are the same. It is 1A, 6B, 1A, repeat. And I will catch up with you back at the beginning. When you've finished your last repeat of the 6 in B, drop your B, switch back to A, and join with a slip stitch to the top of that chain 2 that began the row. Remember, the chain 2 that began the row was also the first or last stitch of the repeating graph pattern. Okay, that is it for the B. You can snip your B, leave yourself a longish tail that you can weave in. If you're using sort of a slippery yarn, then make sure you leave a little bit of a longer tail so you can weave it back and forth a few times and it won't come undone. And now, let's take a look at our graph. We are into row 5. Row 5 is just A. You are double crocheting in every single stitch all the way across. When you get to a corner, you're going to work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet, and continue. We chain 2, turn our blankets. We're going to continue that whole thing where we're always turning at the end of every row. And now you can just start double crocheting in every stitch all the way across. When you get to the corner, you're going to double crochet in every stitch up to the corner, 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet. When you're leaving the corner, make sure you don't miss the first stitch on the way out, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get up to it. As you get up to the corner, you're double crocheting in every single stitch. You work 2 double crochet, chain 2, and 2 double crochet all into that same corner. And when you come out the other side, don't miss the top of the first stitch. Sometimes it can get covered by the work we do in the corner. So just make sure as you're coming out of the corner that you don't miss the top of that next stitch. And that is row 5. It's just double crochet in every single stitch all the way around. You're using color A throughout. You work 2 double crochet, chain 2, 2 double crochet into every corner space, and I'll see you at the end. Once you've finished with your last double crochet, find the top of the chain 2 that began the entire row, and you're just going to slip stitch into the top of it to join. Nice tight little stitch there. And that is it. You can fasten off and take a moment to weave in your tails. I'm going to weave my tails in across the back underneath the easy to find stitches. Remember, when you're weaving in colored yarn, try to weave it in under like color stitches. That way all of your little tails will just completely disappear. Weave your tails in back and forth a couple of times. If you're using slippery yarn, try to leave longer tails and weave them 3 or 4 times just so they don't want to come undone. And you can block your blanket if you like. If you're new to blocking, we've got a couple of links to how to wash and block or steam block in the description box down below. And that is the border all wrapped up. The entire blanket project all wrapped up. I just love that extra little bit of Fair Isle style worked around the border. And I like that we were able to work a bit of color work in the corners too. Now if you didn't and you just went plain white, then that's going to look really neat as well, because it kind of creates solid corners and it highlights all of that extra stitch work. So honestly, there's no wrong way to go with this border pattern. We hope you enjoyed making the Fair Isle style calendar blanket along with us this year. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we will see you soon on the Jayda and Stitches show. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great new year. Bye everyone!
Hi everybody, Mr. and Stitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.